Uncle Sam has maxed out the credit card, but unlike Visa or Amex, no one in Congress is getting the phone call threatening to cut off the cards itself. So what happens? What needs to be done to avoid default? We have CNBC contributor and former Labor Secretary Robert Reich. He's the author of Aftershock. We also welcome Texas Republican Congressman Kevin Brady. He's the vice chair in the Joint Economic Committee. Hello, gentlemen. Mr. Brady, interviewing Nancy Pelosi today, she did sound centrist. Budget cuts, entitlement cuts, pro-growth tax reform. What do you make of that, Congressman Brady? Will that save us from default?
Well, it was nice to hear the former speaker as a born-again Republican and conservative, although I will note on the day that she took the gavel 4.5 years ago, she pledged Democrats would not add a dime to the deficit. That was $5.5 trillion of debt ago. So if I'm a little skeptical, it's because I'm a little skeptical.
Well, as Reagan always said, trust but verify. But let me go to my friend Robert Reich. Robert Reich, you must hate this, hearing Nancy Pelosi talking like Ronald Reagan.
Well, if she were really talking about like Ronald Reagan, Larry, I would hate it, but I didn't hear that. I think Nancy Pelosi is pragmatic. She's saying that the president has called for, with regard to Medicare, a commission that if Medicare spending gets way out of control, faster than inflation, then, in fact, the commission will make binding recommendations on Congress and on Medicare that can only be overturned by an act of Congress. Also, with regard to Social Security and other issues, again, I hear pragmatism, but what I also hear is a willingness on the part of Democrats to raise taxes, particularly on the wealthy, and Republicans saying absolutely not. Who are the ideologically rooted and dug-in people in this debate? Well, it's the people who are really not willing to put everything on the table, and that is the Republican Party.
Well, actually, Congressman Brady, John Kyle, the #2 Republican in the Senate, did put revenues, and I believe he's talking about the same tax expenditures or tax earmarks. He put that on the table Sunday in one of the news shows. What is your reaction to that? Were you surprised?
Yes, I was. I'll tell you, the House Republicans, we do see a balanced approach to the deficit debt ceiling issue. One, I think we need short-term cuts to make sure the American public understands the will of Congress and that private investors, the business community, will step back in with the type of capital to get the economy going. And we balance that with the long-term cuts that shrink the size of government, get a handle on our entitlements, really put us back, I think, on a stronger financial footing. And by the way, I should point out the Speaker also and the President turned off the Medicare trigger that was in the Part D law to force the White House and Congress to deal with Medicare overspending. They turned it off, ignored it. So, again, I'm skeptical that they're serious this time.
Larry, may I ask Congressman Brady a question?
Yes, of course, Robert Reich, but I do want to get to the issue of what the heck happens now that the Treasury debt ceiling is out. Bob Reich, you were around in the Clinton administration when you went through a similar fight. And I want to go to a great piece in today's Wall Street Journal. First of all, Robert Reich, aren't there enough revenues coming out of the economy to finance the U.S. Treasury debt for a very long time? Be things may be cut, Bob, but financing the debt, there's really no default that's going to come. Isn't that a lot of hysteria?
Well, I don't think there's going to be a default, Larry. I think that the Treasury Department has said until August 2nd or thereabouts, there are things that can be done. There are maneuvers that can be taken. I remember Bob Rubin faced a very similar kind of a fight over raising the debt ceiling, and there were things that could be done to postpone that. But you yourself have said, and other Republicans have said, I'm not accusing you of being a Republican, mind you, Republicans have said, look, this is sort of technical. It doesn't matter if we even technically go into default. I think, frankly, that's irresponsible.
Well, actually, Stanley Druckenmiller, I really haven't said that, but I did cover on the radio this weekend the great interview with the famous hedge fund manager, now retired, Stanley Druckenmiller, who said quite simply, if you go into some kind of technical default for 10 days or 15 days, that's okay as long as you get at the underlying problem of this bankruptcy from overspending and overborrowing. Congressman Brady, I want to ask you about what Druckenmiller said. Is that acceptable to you, a 10 or 15-day technical default of some kind?
Well, his point was, look, the market doesn't expect a genuine default. In fact, if anything, they're most concerned with Congress and the White House not getting hold if it's financial challenges. Obviously, we're deep in debt. The deficits are going trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. The market's really looking for some fiscal discipline out of Washington, some real accountability, some controls on our spending. I think clearly that's what we're fighting for. In fact, we can look at President Clinton's years where working with the Republican Congress, he not only shrunk the size of our debt as related to our economy, but he right-sized the government workforce, shrinking it by more than 10%. Why don't we apply the exact same principles today?
Well,
I'm very proud. I'm very proud to have been part of that administration, and I take full credit for balancing the budget and 22 million net new jobs. Congressman, if I can just ask you something, because a moment ago we were debating what's on the table, and I think that I didn't hear you specifically answer Larry's question. Are tax increases, particularly tax increases on the rich, on the table with regard to the Republican caucus?
Well, absolutely not. First, I always love being interviewed by two people. But secondly, no. There isn't anything worse for our economy at a time where, after all that stimulus spending, we have almost 2 million fewer Americans back at work than when we spent all that money. You cannot tax your way back to a balanced budget. It makes no sense at all to punish our job creators.
Mr. Brady, I love being interviewed by Bob Reich on my own show. It's always a great pleasure. I got to leave it there, gentlemen. Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas and the aforementioned Robert Reich.